It's Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. Off-ramps with Iran, maybe. Laken Riley 2.0, and Justice Gorsuch brings up a good point about mail-in voting. Next on the AM Update. Well, we kicked Monday off with a message from President Trump on Truth Social saying he's pleased to report the United States has been having ongoing discussions with Iran over the potential ending of the conflict over their Operation Epic Fury. He said he's going to postpone any bombings of critical energy infrastructure for 5 days while those talks are ongoing. The Foreign Minister Arghachi, as well as various other officials in Iran, have denied any of those types of talks are ongoing. President Trump, for boarding Air Force One, had this to say about the negotiations, if they're actually happening, and what the priorities are.
Points of agreement with Iran right now.
Many.
What can you give us a number of those?
Like 15 points. 15
that
points.
Iran has said yes to.
Well, they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. That's number one. That's number 1, 2, and 3. They will never have a nuclear weapon.
So President Trump says they've already agreed to 15 points. He also added this.
They want very much to make a deal. We'd like to make a deal, too. We're going to get together today by probably phone because it's very hard to find a country. It's very hard for them to get out, I guess. But we'll at some point very, very soon meet. We're doing a 5-day period. We'll see how that goes. And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
So there you have it. Either they come to an agreement in 5 days or they're just going to keep dropping bombs. I have no idea what to make of this. As with most of the messaging from President Trump on Operation Epic Fury, and that's not a knock necessarily on Trump. Of course, he's trying to maintain leverage in like 15 different ways, maybe leverage for each of the 15 points that they have allegedly agreed to with Iran. I saw different reports floating around from Israeli media yesterday as well, saying that some sort of meeting might happen with Islamabad or with Iran in Islamabad, Pakistan as well in the coming days. Who knows how that will shake out? The news that President Trump has been talking, or at least the administration has been talking to Iran, was met with a sharp drop, at least yesterday morning, in oil prices, future prices for oil. So who knows where that is going? My biggest question is what is left actually? Like, who would we know? And I'm sure the administration has a better idea of this than anybody else. Who's left that's actually credible in Iran, within Iran, who has any power with actual teeth within the Iranian regime, who we could actually do a deal with? That's the question that should be answered, at least in the future, the near-term future. Well, let's go to this. At the Supreme Court, it appears already to overturn a Mississippi law that allows mail-in ballots to be counted as long as they're postmarked by and then received within 5 business of Election Day. After just over 2 hours of oral argument in Watson v. Republican National Committee, a majority of justices seemed to agree with the challengers, which included the Republican Party of Mississippi and the Libertarian Party of Mississippi, that the Mississippi law conflicts with federal law that says that Tuesday after the first Monday in November is the election day. That is interesting because this Mississippi law is very much like other laws around the rest of the country that you've probably heard of that allow the counting of ballots, the reception of ballots, many days after the actual election day. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch made a great point about mail-in voting in general. We'll talk about that later on. First, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Harmeet Dillon says it's high time we actually get our house in order when it comes to Election Day.
Is it legal for states to continue to allow ballots to trickle in after the official federal election day in November and count them? Or is that inconsistent with our federal election statutes? That's the question that the United States Supreme Court confronted today in a very interesting, more than 2 hours oral argument that I had the privilege of witnessing. We at the Civil Rights Division, where we're charged with enforcing our federal election laws, had the privilege of co-authoring a brief with our Solicitor General, who then argued it in court today, together with 2 of the other top oral advocates in the country, including former Solicitor General Paul Clement, who argued for the Republican National Committee to uphold the lower court ruling from the Fifth Circuit that indeed the practice of Mississippi, and by the way, parenthetically, many other states, of allowing ballots to trickle in and be counted days and sometimes even up to 3 weeks after an election is inconsistent with our federal election statute.
So there's Harmeet Dillon, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, giving you the nuts and bolts of this case that was heard before the Supreme Court yesterday. As I said, Justice Neil Gorsuch made a great hypothetical argument against mail-in voting, at least the way that it's used. It was a great point, but there's also a larger point I think needs to be made as well. Well, we heard from Border Czar Tom Homan yesterday saying that a plan was already in the works to deploy immigration and customs enforcement officials to various airports around the country who have been short-staffed. At least their TSA has been short-staffed thanks to the ongoing shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security, thanks to Senate Democrats largely. Well, those plans were already underway. According to CNN, about 11 to 15 airports, I've seen different reports, actually saw ICE officers come in and help out TSA with those long lines. I saw a line of about 6 hours in Miami as well. So airports like Hartsfield Jackson in Atlanta, Chicago O'Hare, New Orleans, LaGuardia, and JFK in New York, among others, have received help from immigration and customs enforcement. President Trump also reacted to the news of ICE deploying around the country.
I want to thank ICE because they stepped in so strongly. They'll do great. And if that's not enough, I'll bring in the National Guard. We're not going to have the Democrats destroy our country. These people are the most destructive, sick people, the Democrats. They want, and they're fighting for this. They're fighting for men and women's sports. They're fighting for transgender for everybody. Everybody go out, get your kid a nice operation, and change the sex of your kid. They're fighting for, think of it. They don't want you to do voter ID. You walk into a booth in California.
So there's President Trump taking credit for the idea as well, saying that, you ever heard of the guy who invented the paperclip 100 years ago? And a bunch of people said, hey, I wish I would have thought of that idea. Well, the idea to deploy ICE to airports was my idea. He also added that he requested immigration and customs enforcement officials to take off their masks if they are working in airports in the capacity of TSA. This is a really banal and benign form of election nullification that Democrats are doing right now. And hang with me. Most people, most normies, if they are, if their legs are killing them from standing in a line for 4 hours at an airport just trying to get through security, and they look up on the TV screens, and it's CNN or whatever news network they play on the television screens in airports now. And all they see, they can't see this closed captioning if they even have it at all. They can't hear the audio. All they see are these news networks putting up Trump talking about the government shutdown. Who are most voters going to blame for this, even though it's not Trump's fault? It's like a handful of Democrats in the Senate. That's just a form of election nullification in a very benign form. And I know that one guy out there is going to be, I can't believe you're saying this is a form of election nullification. Don't you know what that means? No, I'm just saying this is a weird psychological game that the Democrats are very effective at playing. Do something, affirmatively do something like shutting down DHS and TSA that intentionally makes people's lives, travelers' lives, miserable, knowing that the average person is not going to be able to delineate between the blame being on them, the people actually responsible for it, and the person at the very top. Hakeem Jeffries as well wants you to know that he thinks we're going to see mass shootings thanks to ICE being deployed at airports.
The last thing that the American people need are for untrained ICE agents to be deployed at airports all across the country, potentially to brutalize or in some instances kill them. We've already seen.
So there's Hakeem Jeffries, House Minority Leader, saying that the deployment of immigration and customs enforcement officials to various locales, airports around the country, will literally kill people. Okay. We go back to Iran, where one of their spokesmen for the IRGC, who was likely an intern like 3 weeks ago, before all of his bosses got blown to bits, had a special message for President Trump. Listen to this.
Hey, Trump, you are fired. You are familiar with this sentence. Thank you for your attention to this matter. The central headquarters of Khatam al-Anbiya.
Okay. There's an IRGC spokesman who looks pretty young, probably an intern for the Revolutionary Guard, Probably like an intern 3 weeks ago. Speaking in English. Hey, Trump, you are fired. I don't know. I think a lot of your bosses, buddy, had a pretty good experience, or bad experience probably, with firings in the recent days. When we come back, crime on the decline in Memphis, Tennessee. Also, Laken Riley 2.0 in Chicago. That's coming up next. President Trump traveled to Memphis, Tennessee to get an update on the efforts of the administration to clean up the streets of cities like Memphis and elsewhere. FBI Director Kash Patel claiming crime in Memphis is down 43%, homicides down 35%, assaults down 31%, sexual assaults down 38%. Stephen Miller, deputy something or another for the White House. Haven't heard from him much, really. After the Charlie Kirk memorial service, he has been out of the limelight. Just completely, he's not been doing hardly any messaging that I've seen anyway. Deputy Chief of Staff, that's right. Forgot about it because he hasn't been out in front of cameras much recently. He was in front of the cameras, though, in Memphis to provide this update.
Well, first and most importantly, thank you to President Trump, whose vision and courage and determination has achieved something that if you had predicted it 15 months ago, people would have said it was impossible. If you had said 15 months ago that we would achieve the lowest national murder rate, not in 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20 or 30 or 40, but in 125 years, nobody would have believed it possible. And President Trump did exactly that, and it is a miracle. Just think about this for a second. Under President Trump's leadership, the largest reduction in murders in American history, the largest reduction in violent crime in American history, the largest reduction in drug overdose deaths in American history, the largest reduction in fentanyl in American history, the largest reduction in illegal immigration in American history, and the largest number of criminals arrested, removed, or deported in American history, all done in 1 year.
So there is White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller touting the president's record on crime especially, and getting into specifics on illegal immigration. Unfortunately and tragically, we are still feeling the ramifications of the disastrous border policies, if you can even call them that, from Joe Biden. You might have heard the story over the weekend of that young lady, a student at Loyola, Chicago, on a walk near a beach in Chicago with some of her friends just a mile outside of school, when she was gunned down by a gunman who apparently, we don't know quite yet, apparently just targeted this group of young ladies randomly. The young woman's name, 18-year-old Sheridan Gorman, passed away, declared dead at the scene. Well, we're now learning that the illegal alien Venezuelan, who police say is responsible for this crime, this murder, was caught and released at the southern border in May of 2023. He was then caught and released for shoplifting in the sanctuary city of Chicago in June of 2023. And now we're learning Jose Medina, the 25-year-old Venezuelan illegal, could not show up to a court appearance on Monday because he has tuberculosis and was being treated for it at a local hospital. We're just checking every single box. Another preventable tragedy if we just had a border during the Biden administration. Another preventable tragedy if we just locked up bad guys in sanctuary cities like Chicago. And of course, yes, he is a bad guy, but even if he were not a bad guy, bringing an infection like tuberculosis across our borders. Again, just checking boxes. We always, of course, have to have compassion for people who live in third world countries. That does not mean, though, that it is the official government position of our country that anybody who is destitute, anybody who is from such a downtrodden country just gets to come here willy-nilly. And another 18-year-old girl, young lady, dead because of those quote-unquote policies. if you can even call him that. I teased this earlier. Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch back at the Supreme Court in the case of that Mississippi lawsuit challenging the Mississippi law that allows mail-in voting to be counted as long as it's postmarked by, quote-unquote, Election Day and received within 5 days of Election Day. Supreme Court Justice Gorsuch questioned Mississippi's Solicitor General, Scott Stewart, on a specific aspect of mail-in voting, and Gorsuch brought up a very interesting point that I'd not heard spelled out in the way that he did so. Listen to this.
Problem. And before I get to that, throughout your brief, you say that the federal statute does require voters to submit their ballots to election officials on Election Day, must be cast by Election Day, and that the Election Day is the day to conclude and consummate the election through a final selection. You agree with all those statements in your brief?
Yes.
Okay. But at the same time, you say, actually, it doesn't have to be submitted to an election official. It just has to be submitted to a common carrier. And there's a contradiction there that I just want you to first address, and then I'll give you my hypothetical.
Very good, Your Honor. I think when you put something in the mail, you're not, I think.
That's not an election official. FedEx isn't an election official.
Right, but the recipient certainly is the person who you're submitting it in the mail to. I mean, that is the recipient.
Of course.
And, right, Your Honor. And I think.
You submit it to FedEx and they deliver it to the election official. But you say it has to be submitted to an election official throughout your brief, but then you say a common carrier is okay. And those two things don't add up.
Well, I think the difference is, say, sending it to your brother versus sending it to the registrar.
Well, we already dealt with that. The brother turns out to be okay, so long as the state says so.
I think that's okay on their view, Your Honor. I'm
okay.
a little more guarded on that.
I think you already answered that one. So here's the hypo. Let's say you have a state where a large portion of the electorate mails in their ballots on or close to Election Day. Not far-fetched. Many states are like that. Then, the day after the election, a story breaks that one of the lead candidates engaged in an inappropriate sexual escapade, or perhaps is concluding with a foreign power. Again, not far-fetched, I think. And the competing candidate immediately goes on the airwaves and urges voters to recall their ballots and to tell the common carriers not to deliver them. And many common carriers will do that with anything that you send through them. FedEx, you just call them up and say, I want it back. In that hypothetical, did the election happen on Election Day? Oh, by the way, it swings the election.
So the election did happen on Election Day, Justice Gorsuch. As we've explained, our ballot does not allow using mail recall, anything like that. When somebody submits their ballot by mail.
Just first deal with my hypothetical, and then I'll deal with your statute.
Okay. The election happened on Election Day.
Even though it changes the outcome.
I mean, I think.
Yes, it has to be your answer, doesn't it?
I mean, yes, Your Honor. I want to be clear about the.
All right.
We are not agreeing that the outcome can be properly changed in that circumstance.
Well, hold on. It did in my hypothetical. You can't change my hypothetical, counsel.
And I'm just saying it's unlawful, Your Honor. I don't mean to disparage your hypothetical. I'm just saying that it's an unlawful circumstance because we don't allow ballot.
Oh, in Mississippi. Okay, but that hypothetical could happen in another state, right?
I think if the state is not providing that on mailing there's a final choice made, I think that would be a problem with that law under the federal statute.
Now, you say your statute, you're different. You admit my hypothetical could happen, but you say it can't happen in Mississippi because recall's not allowed. I couldn't find that anywhere in Mississippi law. In fact, what I did see was a statute that says that the Secretary of State can promulgate rules and regulations. That's 23-15-637-3. And then I went and looked at the regulations, and Rule 2.1 says that an absentee ballot is the final vote of a voter when the ballot is marked accepted. That doesn't preclude recall.
There is Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch having a conversation with the Mississippi Solicitor General Scott Stewart over the legality of Mississippi's law, which is very much like a number of laws all over the country that allows mail-in voting. Mail-in voting if a ballot is postmarked by Election Day and received within X number of days of Election Day. Now, that hypothetical, I agree, is not at all far-fetched that you heard Neil Gorsuch lay out there. And I've not heard it laid out like that, at least not from somebody in his position. I've not heard that case before. That's, as some would say, that's problematic. So that is interesting, and I wanted to share that with you, but I think there's a larger point here that needs to be made. The very first thing that Gorsuch asked him about was not the hypothetical. It was Mississippi law, a detail of the Mississippi law, saying that these ballots must be submitted to an election official. Is a mailman an election official? Is the DHL man, the UPS man, the FedEx man, is that an election official? No. But you heard the Solicitor General say there, well, technically it's a carrier, it's a common carrier, it's being submitted to the election official, it's just being carried by somebody. Still, I think what Gorsuch brought up there is a valid and reasonable point. It's not exactly explicitly spelled out that it's okay to submit it first to a common carrier and then to an election official. That's before we even get to the legality of whether or not it's constitutional for these various state laws to exist. And then we get to that legality. We get to the hypothetical. And you heard the Solicitor General say there, well, Mississippi state law doesn't explicitly say that you can recall your ballot. That doesn't matter. What does it matter to FedEx or USPS or UPS if you call them up and say, hey, here's the tracking number on this package. I want it recalled. Don't deliver it. So it's very much a valid hypothetical. And you heard the Solicitor General say, well, that's not, I disagree. I don't think that's legal in Mississippi. Here's the larger point. One, there was confusion and fuzziness at best before we even got to the legality of whether or not you should be able to mail in a ballot on Election Day, postmarked by Election Day, and have it counted up to 5 days after Election Day. There's confusion on even whether that was legal under Mississippi law. And then there's great confusion over whether it constitutes, if you can recall ballots, which I think Gorsuch made recall, your mail, it's not the ballot itself, but the mail that you send, if that can be recalled after Election Day and impact the actual election due to a scandal that broke on or the day after Election Day, isn't that a problem? Doesn't that mean that the Election Day didn't actually happen on Election Day? Confusion and fuzziness before we even get to the heart of the matter. Confusion and fuzziness on the heart of the matter. And this is not coming from Joe Blow or Aaron McIntyre. This is coming from the Solicitor General of the state of Mississippi, whose job it is to know and defend Mississippi law. And from one of the Supreme Court justices of the nation's highest court, who are both confused and fuzzy about what the actual law is. If they're confused, what do you think the average person is confused about? Oh, and this is all about our sacred democracy, our sacred right to vote. The irony, and I think it's intentional irony, when it comes particularly to the issue of mail-in voting. The irony is that the left couches mail-in voting as defending your sacred right to vote and our sacred democracy. If something is so sacred and so set into the law on stone tablets, don't you think it should be easily understood by the average person, not to mention the Solicitor Generals or Solicitors General of states and Supreme Court justices? Don't you think there's a bit of a problem where there's a great deal of fuzziness for those people? I happen to think so. That's going to do it for Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow. I'm Aaron McIntyre, and this is the AM Update.